I've been on plenty of road trips over the years, but this one experience still makes my skin crawl. It's the kind of story that seems ridiculous until it happens to you. And let me tell you, I'll never look at gas station bathrooms the same way again. This happened about 2 years ago. I was driving cross-country to visit some family, and I'd been on the road for about 5 hours when my stomach started to rebel. You know the feeling. When that gas station hot dog you probably shouldn't have eaten decides to come back with a vengeance. I pulled into the next gas station I saw. It was one of those small, sketchy places on the side of a rural highway, with faded signs and a lone pump. But at that point, I didn't care. I needed a bathroom, and I needed it now. I rushed inside, found the bathroom in the back corner, and locked myself in one of the stalls. It wasn't the cleanest place, but I didn't have much of a choice. I was just glad it was empty so I could handle my business in peace. Or so I thought. About a minute later, I heard the bathroom door creak open. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Someone else probably just needed to use the bathroom. But then I noticed something strange. Whoever had come in wasn't moving. There were no footsteps. No sounds of them using the sink or the other stall. Just silence. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe they were just waiting their turn. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Movement through the tiny gap between the stall door and the frame. Someone was standing right there, peeking in. My heart nearly stopped. At first, I froze, hoping they'd realize I saw them and go away. But they didn't. The guy just stood there, his face partially visible through the gap. I couldn't make out much, just pale skin and a pair of eyes staring directly at me. Can I help you?" I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The guy didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just kept staring. At this point, my fear turned to anger. "Dude, what the hell? Get out of here!" I yelled, my voice echoing off the tile walls. That seemed to do the trick. The guy flinched, took a step back, and then walked out of the bathroom without saying a word. I sat there for a second, trying to calm down and process what had just happened. When I finished up and walked out, I looked around the gas station to see if I could spot the guy, but he was gone. I told the cashier what happened, and they just shrugged and said, "Yeah, we get weirdos around here sometimes." Needless to say, I didn't stick around. I got back in my car and drove for another hour before stopping at a much busier gas station to regroup. I still don't know what that guy's deal was. Maybe he was just some harmless weirdo, but the way he stared without saying a word freaked me out more than anything. Now I make a point to use the bathroom at big, busy places whenever I can, and I always double-check the lock on the stall door. To the gas station bathroom creep, let's not meet. Hey everyone. This happened a couple of years ago when my girlfriend and I decided to take a road trip down the West Coast. What was supposed to be a fun and adventurous getaway turned into one of the most terrifying nights of my life. We'd been driving all day, stopping at little towns along the way, but by the time the sun went down, we were in the middle of nowhere. The highway was surrounded by dense trees, and there weren't any streetlights or signs of civilization in sight. Around 10 p.m., we realized we were too tired to keep going. We started looking for somewhere to stay, and after what felt like forever, we saw a flickering neon sign that said, "Motel, Vacancy." The building looked run down with cracked windows and peeling paint, but we figured it was better than sleeping in the car. We pulled into the gravel lot and walked into the tiny lobby. Behind the desk was an older man, probably in his 60s with a weathered face and a stained button-up shirt. He gave us a toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for a room?" he asked. "Yeah, just for the night," I replied, trying to sound casual. He handed us a key and told us our room was at the far end of the lot. As we walked back to the car, my girlfriend whispered, "Something about him creeps me out." I agreed, but I told her it was probably just the vibe of the place. It was old and isolated after all. When we got to the room, it was even worse than we'd expected. The walls were stained, the carpet smelled musty, and the bed looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. There was a single flickering lamp on the nightstand, casting eerie shadows across the room. "Let's just sleep and get out of here in the morning," I said, trying to calm both of us down. But as the night went on, things started to get weird. Around midnight, we heard footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth in front of our door. "Do you think it's the manager?" my girlfriend whispered. "I don't know," I said, trying to stay calm. The footsteps stopped, and then we heard the doorknob rattle. Someone was trying to open the door. Luckily, we always travel with a door stopper. It's this little rubber wedge we slide under the door just in case something like this ever happens. I wedged it into place earlier as a precaution, and now I was thanking myself for it. The rattling stopped for a moment, and then we heard whispers, muffled but definitely from more than one voice. My girlfriend peeked through the blinds and froze. "There are two of them," she whispered, her face pale. "They're trying to get in." I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up quickly, and I explained the situation as quietly as I could. While I was on the phone, the doorknob started rattling again, this time harder, more frantic. "They're not stopping," my girlfriend said, her voice shaking. The operator told me to stay calm and that the police were on their way. She said to stay on the line and make sure we didn't open the door for anyone. The door stopper was holding, but the pounding on the door was getting louder, and I could hear the wood creaking under the pressure. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. We were trapped, and I had no idea if the door would hold. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, we saw the flashing red and blue lights outside. The banging stopped instantly, and we heard hurried footsteps running away. The police knocked on the door and identified themselves, and we removed the door stopper to let them in. They searched the area but didn't find the two men. They must have taken off into the woods behind the motel. The officers told us we were smart to use the door stopper and that it probably saved us from whatever those guys had planned. They also mentioned that this particular motel had a reputation for attracting trouble, which is something the manager conveniently didn't mention when we checked in. We left immediately that night and drove to the nearest town, where we found a well-lit, busy hotel. We didn't sleep much, but we were grateful to be safe. Now every time we go on a road trip, we double-check our emergency supplies, and we never stay at sketchy motels. This happened during a road trip my girlfriend and I took a couple of years ago. We were driving through a rural stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those roads that seemed to go on forever, with nothing but trees and fields on either side. There were no streetlights, and by the time the sun set, the road was pitch black. Around 10 p.m., we realized we hadn't seen another car for at least 20 minutes. It was eerie, but we figured it was just because we were in such a remote area. That's when we noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. At first, we were relieved. Finally, we weren't the only ones out here. But as the car got closer, something felt off. It wasn't just passing by or keeping a steady distance like normal. It was following us. The car stayed about 50 feet behind us, matching our speed no matter how fast or slow we went. My girlfriend joked that maybe they just liked the pace we were setting, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. I decided to test it. I slowed down to 30 miles per hour, hoping they'd just pass us. But instead, they slowed down too. Then I sped up to 60. They sped up. At this point, I was freaking out. "What do they want?" my girlfriend whispered, gripping the seat. I had no idea. Suddenly, their headlights flickered off, leaving the road behind us in total darkness. I couldn't see their car anymore, just the faint outline of the trees lining the highway. "Did they stop?" my girlfriend asked, but before I could answer, the headlights came back on, brighter than before. They were closer now, right on our tail, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. I floored it, going as fast as I could without losing control on the winding road. The car behind us kept pace, their high beams flooding our car with blinding light. My girlfriend was on her phone, trying to find the nearest town or gas station, but there was nothing for miles. Finally, we saw a sign for a rest stop a few miles ahead. It wasn't ideal, but I figured it was better than staying on the highway with these lunatics tailing us. I turned on my blinker and pulled into the rest stop's parking lot, hoping they'd just keep driving. But they didn't. The car pulled in right behind us, parking a few spaces away. The lot was mostly empty, with only one other car parked near the bathrooms. I told my girlfriend to stay in the car while I got out to see what they wanted. I was scared, but I didn't want to let them think they'd rattled me. As I stepped out, I saw the driver's door of their car open, and a man got out. He was tall and wiry, dressed in dirty clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with this crooked grin that made my skin crawl. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head like he was thinking about what to say. Then he muttered, "Nice car. Wouldn't want anything to happen to it." That was enough for me. I got back in the car and locked the doors. My girlfriend was practically in tears, asking what he said, but I just told her to call the police. The man stood there for a few seconds, staring at us, before getting back in his car. Then, instead of driving off, he just sat there, his headlights glaring into our car. We didn't wait for the cops to show up. As soon as he was back in his car, I floored it, getting back on the highway and driving as fast as I could. The other car didn't follow us this time, but we didn't feel safe until we reached the next town an hour later. I don't know what that guy's intentions were, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't anything good. I still can't believe how reckless we were that day. Looking back, it's one of those things you can't help but cringe about because you know it could have gone so much worse. This happened a year ago when two of my friends, Dylan and Max, and I took a road trip to visit another friend who lived about 10 hours away. The plan was simple: leave early, drive straight through, and arrive by nightfall. But being the idiots we were, we didn't bother to sleep the night before. We stayed up playing video games, eating junk food, and hyping ourselves up for the trip. By the time we hit the road at 6 a.m., we were already running on fumes. The first few hours went fine. We switched drivers a couple of times, blasting music and drinking energy drinks to stay awake. But by the time we hit hour 7, the fatigue really started to hit us. Dylan, who was driving at the time, started nodding off at the wheel. I caught him swerving slightly and yelled, "Dude, pull over before we all die." We all agreed it was time for a quick nap. There wasn't a rest stop in sight, so we decided to just pull off onto the shoulder of the highway. It wasn't ideal, but we figured we'd only sleep for 30 minutes and then get back on the road. Dylan reclined his seat and passed out almost instantly. Max was snoring in the back within seconds. I tried to stay awake to keep watch, but the exhaustion was too much. I passed out too. I don't know how long we were asleep, but I woke up to a strange noise. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again, a faint tapping, like someone was knocking on the window. I sat up, groggy and disoriented, and looked out the window. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing right outside Dylan's door. He looked to be in his 40s, with messy hair and a wild look in his eyes. He was yanking on the driver's door handle, muttering something under his breath. His movements were erratic, like he was tweaking out on something. "Dylan, wake up!" I hissed, shaking his shoulder. He groaned, half asleep, but when he saw the man pulling on the handle, he snapped awake. "What the hell?" Dylan muttered, panic creeping into his voice. Before we could do anything, the man started pounding on the window with his fist, shouting, "Open the door! I need a ride! Let me in!" His tone wasn't pleading. It was aggressive, like he was demanding it. Max woke up in the back seat, completely confused. "What's going on?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Lock the doors," I yelled, even though I was pretty sure they were already locked. Dylan's hands fumbled with the key, and within seconds, he had the car in drive. The man didn't back off. He started running alongside the car as Dylan hit the gas, still shouting and banging on the window. "Stop! Let me in! You can't leave!" I don't know how fast Dylan was going, but it felt like we were flying down the shoulder of the highway. Finally, the man gave up and stopped running, disappearing into the distance behind us. We didn't stop driving until we reached a gas station about 20 minutes later. We parked under the bright lights, locked the doors, and just sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. "What the hell was his deal?" Max finally said, breaking the silence. None of us had an answer. All we knew was that Dylan's quick reaction had probably saved us from something horrible. We made it to our destination safely, but we all agreed never to pull over on the side of the road again unless it was an emergency. Now, every time we go on a road trip, we make sure to plan out safe rest stops and actually sleep the night before. Hey everyone. I've been a fan of this subreddit for a long time, but I never thought I'd have a story to share until now. This happened last year during a road trip my best friend Jake and I took. It was supposed to be an epic adventure, but one night turned it into a nightmare I'll never forget. We were driving through the mountains late at night, heading to a national park we wanted to camp at the next day. The drive had been gorgeous during the day, but by the time night fell, the winding roads and thick trees started to feel a little creepy. There were no lights, no other cars, just endless darkness and the faint hum of the radio. Around midnight, we both decided we needed a break. We'd been driving for hours, and I was getting drowsy. We saw a sign for a rest stop a couple of miles ahead and figured it'd be a good place to stretch our legs and switch drivers. When we pulled into the lot, it was completely deserted. There were a few parking spaces, a small building with a couple of vending machines, and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The only light came from a single flickering street lamp near the entrance. Jake got out to use the bathroom while I stayed in the car, scrolling through my phone. A few minutes passed and I started to feel uneasy. The silence outside was oppressive, like the kind where even the wind refuses to make a sound. Then, out of nowhere, I saw someone. A man stepped out of the shadows from behind the bathroom building. He was tall and thin, with stringy hair and a dirty jacket. At first, I thought he might have been a trucker or another traveler, but something about the way he moved was off. He wasn't walking toward the vending machines or the bathroom. He was walking straight toward our car. I locked the doors immediately, my heart pounding. Jake still wasn't back, and I started panicking. I rolled down the window just a crack and called out, "Can I help you?" The man stopped a few feet from the car, staring at me with wide eyes and this strange, lopsided grin. "Nice car," he said, his voice low and raspy. "You boys heading far tonight?" I didn't respond. I just kept my hand on the door lock, praying Jake would come back soon. The man took another step closer, and I noticed something in his hand. It was small and metallic. Maybe a knife, but I couldn't be sure in the dim light. "You should be careful out here," he said, his grin widening. "Lots of accidents happen on these roads." That's when Jake finally walked out of the bathroom. He froze when he saw the man near the car, and for a second no one moved. Then Jake, trying to act tough, said, "Hey man, what's going on?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head and slowly backed away, disappearing into the shadows behind the building. Jake jumped in the car, and we peeled out of there as fast as we could. As we were driving away, we both kept looking back, half expecting to see him standing in the middle of the road. Thankfully, we didn't. We drove for another hour before finally pulling into a motel, where we spent the night. Neither of us slept much, though. We couldn't stop thinking about that guy and what might have happened if Jake hadn't come back when he did. I still wonder if he was waiting for someone like us, tired travelers at an empty rest stop, too distracted to notice something wasn't right. It was the middle of July, and I was driving cross-country to visit some friends. I'd always wanted to do a solo road trip, and everything had been going great so far. I had my snacks, my playlists, and a detailed route mapped out. On the third day of my trip, I found myself in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the Midwest. The highway was long and empty, with nothing but flat fields and the occasional broken-down barn to break up the scenery. Around 8 p.m., I noticed my gas gauge was getting low. I hadn't seen a gas station for miles, and I was starting to get nervous. Just when I thought I might have to pull over and call for help, I saw a small, run-down gas station up ahead. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Flickering neon sign, cracked pavement, and a single pump. But I didn't have much of a choice. I pulled in, and the place was eerily quiet. There wasn't another car in sight, and the convenience store attached to the station looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I parked by the pump, got out, and started filling up. That's when I noticed him. The attendant. He was standing just inside the glass door of the store, staring at me. He didn't move or wave, just stood there with his arms crossed, watching. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was probably just bored, but it was unsettling. He had this gaunt, hollow look, like he hadn't slept in days. After I finished pumping gas, I decided to go inside to grab a drink and use the restroom. The moment I walked in, the guy's eyes locked on me. His face didn't change. No smile. No hello. Nothing. The air inside was stale, and the shelves were half empty, stocked with dusty cans and expired snacks. "Evening?" I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond, just kept staring as I walked past him toward the back of the store where the restroom was. The bathroom was surprisingly clean, but when I came out, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The guy wasn't at the counter anymore. He was gone. I glanced around, trying to spot him, but the store was empty. That's when I heard it. A faint shuffling sound, like footsteps, coming from the back storage area. I decided I didn't need a drink after all. I walked as quickly as I could to the front door, keeping my eyes on the storage room. Just as I reached the exit, I heard the footsteps get louder, like someone was walking toward me. I bolted for my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. As I started the engine, I saw him again. He was standing in the doorway of the store, staring at me with that same blank expression. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another man, dressed in similar dirty overalls, was standing behind him, holding what looked like a crowbar. I didn't stick around to see what they wanted. I peeled out of there as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop driving for over an hour, even though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. To this day, I don't know what their intentions were, but I'm glad I didn't stay to find out. Now, I always make sure to fill up my tank during the day and stick to well-lit, busy gas stations. To the gas station attendants in the middle of nowhere, let's not meet. We were driving through a rural area in the Pacific Northwest, heading to a cabin we'd rented for the weekend. The weather was awful, heavy rain, thick fog, and winding roads that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. It felt like something out of a horror movie. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and we hadn't seen another car in miles. We were joking around to keep ourselves awake when we saw someone up ahead on the side of the road. It was a man, soaking wet, standing under a streetlight with his thumb out. Chris and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. What the hell is this guy doing out here? He wasn't dressed for the weather, just a flannel shirt and jeans, and there was no car or house in sight. I slowed down instinctively, but Chris grabbed my arm and said, "Don't stop. This feels wrong." I nodded, speeding up a little, but as we passed him, I couldn't help glancing out my window. The guy was staring straight at us, his face pale and gaunt, with these dark circles under his eyes that made him look unwell. He didn't wave or call out, just kept staring as we drove past. "That was creepy," Chris muttered, and I agreed. But a few minutes later, we saw something that made my stomach drop. There was another streetlight up ahead, and under it was the same guy. Same flannel shirt, same soaked jeans, same dead-eyed stare. "There's no way," I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter. Chris was already on edge, sitting upright in his seat. "How did he get here before us?" I had no idea. We hadn't passed any turnoffs or side roads, and there was no way he could have run through the rain and beaten us to that spot. "Keep driving," Chris said, his voice low and tense. I did. We passed him again, and this time I didn't look, but the feeling in the car had shifted. It was like the air was heavier, and neither of us could shake the sense that something was very wrong. About 10 minutes later, we came to a small gas station, the first sign of civilization we'd seen in a while. I pulled in, desperate for a break and some light. The place was old and dimly lit, but at least it wasn't the pitch-black highway. As Chris and I got out of the car, I heard him gasp. I followed his gaze, and there, standing at the edge of the parking lot, was the man. He was drenched, his clothes dripping water onto the asphalt, and he was staring at us with that same vacant expression. "Get back in the car," Chris hissed. We didn't even bother going into the gas station. We jumped back in the car, locked the doors, and sped off. As we pulled out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, watching us leave. We didn't stop again until we reached the cabin. Even then, neither of us felt safe. We triple-checked the locks on the doors and windows, but I didn't sleep that night. I kept expecting to look out the window and see him standing there, waiting. To this day, I have no explanation for what we saw or how he kept appearing ahead of us. Maybe it was just someone messing with us, but it felt impossible. To the hitchhiker in the rain, let's not meet.